It started off as a joke, like most things do. I was hanging out with some friends, swapping stories about urban legends and creepy folklore. We were all trying to outdo each other, each tale more absurd than the last. But then, one of my friends mentioned something that hit a bit too close to home. "Have you heard about the Silver and Clover Curse?" he asked, his tone more serious than usual. We all shook our heads, intrigued. "Well, supposedly, if you hear Crimson and Clover by Tommy James and the Shondells, but the lyrics are changed to Silver and Clover, it means something really bad about to happen, like something is coming for you." We all laughed it off at first, but the idea lingered. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I experienced it for myself. I was driving home late one night, the road deserted, and the only light coming from my headlights. I had the radio on, scanning through the stations to find something to keep me awake. Then, I stumbled upon a familiar melody. It was Crimson and Clover, one of those timeless songs that you can't help but sing along to. But something was off. Instead of Crimson and Clover, the lyrics were Silver and Clover. A chill ran down my spine. I remembered my friend's story and laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as a prank or a misheard lyric. But the unease settled in, like a cold weight on my chest. I switched off the radio, the silence in the car suddenly deafening. I reached home without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The shadows in my apartment seemed darker, the silence more oppressive. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. My dreams were filled with haunting melodies and a sense of being watched. The next day, I tried to forget about it, but that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard it again. The faint strains of Silver and Clover echoed through my apartment, though I couldn't pinpoint the source. I checked the radio, my phone, even my laptop, but they were all off. The song was just there, hanging in the air like a malevolent spirit. That's when I saw it, a shadow in the corner of my eye, a dark shape that seemed to pulse and writhe. It was there for just a moment, but it was enough. I knew then that the stories were true. Something was coming for me. Over the next few days, the song played more frequently, always just on the edge of my hearing. It would start quietly, a whisper of a melody that grew louder and more insistent. And with it, the shadows grew bolder, creeping closer each time. I started researching, desperate to find a way to stop it. That's when I found the legends, buried deep in obscure forums and ancient texts. The entity attached to Silver and Clover was ancient and malevolent, feeding on fear and anger. It was drawn to negative emotions, using the song as a herald of its arrival. The only way to avoid it, the text said, was to remain calm. It fed on fear, growing stronger with each pulse of terror. If you could stay calm, if you could push aside the fear and anger, it would lose its grip. Easier said than done when you're being hunted by an incomprehensible monster. I tried everything: meditation, breathing exercises, even sedatives. But the song was relentless, wearing down my defenses. It would play at the most unexpected times, when I was at my weakest. And with each play, the entity grew closer. One night, the song started as I was drifting off to sleep. This time, it was louder than ever, the lyrics clear and haunting. I felt the shadows closing in, a suffocating presence that pressed down on my chest. My heart raced, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I remembered the advice, forcing myself to take slow, deep breaths. I focused on the rhythm of my breathing, trying to block out the song. The shadows hesitated, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. But the song persisted, a relentless assault on my senses. In the dim light of my bedroom, I saw it, the entity, a shifting mass of darkness, standing at the foot of my bed. It had no form, no eyes or mouth, but I could feel its gaze, cold and hateful. It pulsed with anger, feeding on my fear. I closed my eyes, focusing on calm thoughts, memories of happy times, of laughter and love. The song wavered, the entity's presence lessening, but it wasn't enough. It was still there, a persistent shadow in the corner of my mind. I needed more, I reached for my phone, playing a song that made me happy, a song filled with warmth and light. The two songs clashed, the air vibrating with conflicting melodies. The entity recoiled, its form wavering. I kept the happy song playing, letting it fill the room. Slowly, the entity faded, the shadows retreating. The oppressive weight lifted, the air clearing. I had won, for now, but I knew it wasn't over. The entity would be back, drawn to my fear and anger. I had to stay vigilant, to keep my emotions in check. The song would play again, and each time, it would be a battle for my sanity. To those of you reading this, take heed. If you ever hear Silver and Clover, know that something dark and vengeful is coming for you. Stay calm, focus on positive emotions, and don't let the fear take hold. It's your only chance of survival. And remember, the battle ain't over. It's just the beginning. The entity is always watching, always waiting, and it will return with the haunting melody of Silver and Clover as its herald. Stay strong, stay calm, and don't let it win. For now, I continue my life, each day a struggle against the fear that the song will start again. I've learned to keep my emotions in check, to find joy in the small things. But the memory of that shadow, of the oppressive weight, is always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I've found others like me, people who have heard the song and survived. We share our stories, our strategies for staying calm. It helps, knowing I'm not alone in this. But it's a small comfort, knowing that the entity is still out there, waiting. I've come to accept that this is my life now, a constant battle against an unseen foe. But I refuse to let it win. I refuse to let the fear take hold. I will stay strong, stay calm, and fight back with everything I have. So, if you ever hear the haunting strains of Silver and Clover, remember my story. Remember that you're not alone, and that you can fight back. Stay calm, stay strong, and don't let the fear win. The entity is out there, waiting, but so am I, and I will not let it take me. Did you see that? My mother said as we sped past an orange blur. I saw out of the corner of my eye. What was it? I asked. I was trying to see what was in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing except the inky darkness of the country road. They were having a bonfire, just like we did a couple of weeks ago. Do you reckon it was a burn-off like ours was? I asked because we didn't have a bonfire a few weeks ago. It was a big pile of cuttings from trees and bushes we lit on fire because it took up too much space. Theirs is bigger and a lot kids dancing around it. Which is stupid because what if one of them tripped and fell in? This should have set off alarm bells in my head. It was extremely out of character for anyone in my local area, and honestly, it seemed more insidious than innocent. Instead, I was more focused on the road. I had only recently gotten my driver's license. It was irregularly dark on the road, and my mother's car was some European import, which I was struggling to drive safely. My mom didn't bring it up again on the rest of the drive into town. Next, I was running home. My mom was on her way to pick me up after she had gone home with the shopping while I had been at the gym. I sent a message to my mother, but I got no reply. Still, I wanted to get home ASAP. So, I began to run home to close the gap between myself and my mother. I was running and enjoyed the cold night breeze on my face when the sky turned red. It was like a flashbang as fire erupted and consumed the sky. A word in a language I couldn't even identify echoed around me. My eyes had no time to adjust to the sudden blast of light from the sky, so I shut them tight. Dazed and left in darkness, my other senses began to pick up on everything else. The rush of heat was intense, akin to the blast of hot air when you open an oven. I could feel sweat forming on my brow. The smell of cow shit had been replaced with burnt hair, gunpowder, and cooking meat. I heaved, dinner rushing up my throat. Beyond my retching, I heard a cacophony of livestock calling out, sizzling, and delighted screams. It sounded like the sound children make when celebrating someone's birthday. I struggled to keep my eyes open, blinking profusely as my eyes hadn't adjusted to the sky, and the heat made it feel like they would dry up if I didn't keep them wet. Eventually, I got my bearings and was able to look around. The first thing my eyes were drawn to was roadkill. I couldn't see in the dark. But now, with the illumination from the burning sky, I could see it in all its grotesque glory. It looked like a possum. The next thing I noticed was dancing fire. A small and strange inferno frolicked onto legs of flame, twisting and gliding towards the possum's body. I watched, my mouth agape, as it stopped beside the possum. With an exaggerated leap, it dived into the possum carcass. Confused, I stared as it dissolved into the roadkill. Seconds later, the corpse began to writhe as its joints pivoted unnaturally, and its flattened body began to inflate. It got onto all fours before it started to tear and contort. Its jaw opened wider and wider, splitting the tissue as its mouth recessed deeper and deeper into the possum's body. The top of the possum's head rose from its body like a snake getting ready to strike as the jaw fell limply, dragging on the road. Its ribs broke and ripped from its flesh and moved around freely, eventually settling like pincers lining the new upper jaw of the possum. As it began marching towards me, the possum's tail was pulled back into its body, sprouted out of the possum's new throat, and followed more. These new tongues whipped and thrashed around like tentacles, and I watched as they flailed with such vigor that they tore and gouged at the possum's flesh. After this final adaptation, the possum finally charged at me. I don't know if what happened next was divine intervention or just pure luck, but as the possum closed the gap, I was frozen in fear. I watched it get closer and closer until one of the tongues struck the left front leg of the possum. This completely severed it. Because of this, the possum lost its balance and went tumbling, ass over head, into some gorse next to the road. This broke me from my trance, and I pivoted 180 degrees into a sprint. Over all the commotion, I could hear hoarse hissing from behind me. That was when I saw the possum had recovered and was charging at me. Its right front leg had somehow shifted into the middle, and it was sprinting at me again. I looked around, panicked, and noticed a large branch in the grass next to the road. I sprinted harder than I will ever sprint to grab that stick. I picked it up and spun around, clutching it like a bat. The possum was airborne and flying at my face, all of its tongue stiff and pointed like spear ready to impale my face. With a swing that would have gotten me drafted by the Yankees, the branch connected with the possum in such a way that it exploded upon impact, sending chunks of it flying off to my left. I didn't watch to see whether it had died. I just ran in the opposite direction. I ran until I found a place to hide. There was a small shed out in a field far from where the possum burst open. That's where I am now. After what happened with the possum, I was extremely vigilant while running. Everything is extremely fucked up here and none of it makes sense. I saw a man crouched over in the middle of the road calling for help. It was only when I got within 10 meters I realized he couldn't be shouting so loud while his head was buried in the road. I saw a horse that had been lit on fire chase down a herd of cows, and when it touched one, the entire herd combusted like they had all been drenched in gasoline. I ran past a hole the size of a manhole cover in the middle of the road that was talking. For some reason, I stopped and listened, and it kept insisting it was my grandmother. As I turned around and continued running, it kept saying over and over, "Come and let Nana tell you a secret." The worst is that I saw a sheep get possessed by one of those fire things while it was still alive. It was screeching in pain as it changed. I forced myself to look away and started sprinting. I don't think it saw me. I keep trying to text my parents, but all my messages get read, but go unanswered. I tried calling my mom once, and the person who picked up the phone whispered, "You are making too much noise," and hung up. I am pretty sure the voice on the other end of the phone was my own. This is my last line of communication to the outside. Despite being out in the middle of nowhere, I somehow still have a strong signal, and even though I have been on my phone religiously since I found shelter, my phone hasn't lost any battery. In fact, I think it has gone up by 1% or 2%. I am so thirsty. but there is nothing to drink. The only thing I want at this stage is answers. I am so confused. The only thing I can think could have caused this was those fucking kids and their bonfire, but even that is a stretch. I think I'm despite for anything. So, can anyone please tell me what ritual involves kids and a bonfire? I'll make this quick. I'm so numb that I haven't had a chance really to process my grief yet. Maybe I never will. It's possible that posting about this here isn't exactly a great idea for my mental health. But what else can I do? I need to get out what I'm feeling. And this is as good a place as any, I suppose. So, this happened the other evening, right in front of my very eyes. The love of my life for over 60 years was taken from me in an instant, and I was completely powerless to stop it. And of all fucking things, it was the result of gun violence. You know what the saddest thing is? We could hear them coming, shouting and chanting. If I had a time machine, I would go back to that very moment and scream for us to run. I mean, how could I have known they would have been so evil? I remember looking over at my wife that evening, thinking just how beautiful she was. How lucky I was to be spending our anniversary in such a magical place with such a wonderful history. How did I get so lucky? How did someone like her choose someone like me? The shouting was getting closer. Our seat outside, under the warm nighttime air, seemed perfect. We could see the other patrons look around nervously as the shouting got closer. We could tell what they were thinking. Was this really happening? Are they actually going through with this? We heard a few screams in the distance, but it was hard to tell what they were. Were they shouts of pain or anger? It soon became impossible to tell over all the approaching noise. The first one to get shot was someone from London. A boy really, that stood up smiling awkwardly. It looked like he tried to jump over and position himself in front of his date. It was pointless though. They shouted at him and then shot him, right there, almost from point-blank range. Now here is where the really pathetic and sad part is. Even at that moment, after the scrawny boy was shot, I didn't think they were serious. I sat there and smiled at my wife and told her there was no way this was happening. It was just rumor. The boy that was just shot was then shot again by another person. Then another one joined in and shot him over and over again. Of course, the boy laughed. His girlfriend, with her much healthier look, seemed annoyed with his stunt. She seemed more intent on covering her leather bag than paying attention to her less appetizing boyfriend. El Torres mas humada els barras, they shouted to their victims. Many of them now leaving the restaurant frustrated at their ruined evening. My wife and I though didn't budge. I guess you could call it arrogance. We weren't going to let these people ruin our special night. There was a moment when one of them raised their gun and pointed it at my wife. I had a split second to react. I could have done the same thing as the boy. Jump up and stand in between my wife and this gun-wielding maniac. Instead, I sat there, smiling with a fake smile. The rumor we heard about La Benedictio Clandestina had instilled enough fear into me that I sat there like a shameless coward. It was over in an instant. The flames shot up to the stars as the sudden heat pushed me out of my chair. The shooter's shouts of frustration turned to a sudden scream of surprise. It was over so fast. Even in the air I could feel death, the lethal particles floating around. Otherwise I would have ran to the murderer and ended them. But like a coward, I fled. I tried to run to the hotel, but the street was blocked, so I ran to the university. Someone even tried handing me a gun, thinking I was some student protester. That night, I barely made it out of the city that we loved. At this point, I don't even know what I should do. My wife is gone, and I only have myself to blame. I know I wasn't the only one. I heard they got others with their plan. Anyway, that's my story. I guess if anything, maybe this shows that you shouldn't get too comfortable with where you are at. It can all be taken from you in an instant, so enjoy the time you have with your loved ones while you can.